Power has taken many forms through history. Armies and empires, faith and ideas, nations built and nations destroyed. From conquerors who redrew the map to visionaries who reshaped a society, these individuals left marks so deep that the world still carries their impact. Here's 15 of the most powerful people in all of human history. Starting with 15, Alexander the Great. Alexander III, known to history as Alexander the Great, built one of the largest empires the ancient world had ever seen, and he did it all before the age of 33. Born in Pella, the capital of Macedonia, Alexander was tutored by Aristotle and trained as a military commander by his father, King Philip II. When Philip was assassinated, the 20-year-old Alexander inherited the throne, immediately setting out expanding Macedon's power. In just over a decade, Alexander led campaigns that toppled the Persian Empire, at that time the most powerful state in the known world. Beginning with victories at the battles of Granicus, Issus, and finally Gaugamela, Alexander systematically dismantled Persian control across Asia Minor, the Levant, Egypt, and Mesopotamia, and into the heart of Persia itself. His conquest extended further into Central Asia and even into the Punjab region of India. By the time his soldiers refused to march farther east in 326 BCE, Alexander had created an empire stretching from Greece to the Indus River. What made him so powerful wasn't just his military genius, but the cultural impact of his conquests. He founded more than 20 cities, many named Alexandria, the most famous being Alexandria in Egypt. These cities were centers of Greek culture and administration. They spread Hellenistic influence across the Middle East and Asia. Greek language, art, architecture, and philosophy all blended with local traditions, creating a new cultural world that endured long after his death. His personal charisma and battlefield leadership were legendary. He often fought alongside his soldiers, sharing their risks and inspiring loyalty. His strategy and tactics, like the use of the phalanx in combination with cavalry, the Roman Empire later saw itself as following in Alexander's footsteps, and military leaders from Julius Caesar to Napoleon studied his campaigns. Yet Alexander's empire was fragile. He died suddenly in Babylon in 323 BCE, possibly from fever, poisoning, or other causes still debated to historians. He left no clear heir. His generals, known as the Diadochi, divided his empire into rival kingdoms, sparking decades of conflict. Number 14. Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan, born as Temujin on the Mongolian steppe around 1162, rose from obscure beginnings to become the founder of the largest contiguous land empire in the world. His life story is one of resilience, vision, and ruthlessness. As a child, his family was left destitute after his father, a tribal chief, was poisoned. He grew up in a harsh environment where survival depended on forging alliances and asserting dominance. Through a mix of charisma, military skill, and political acumen, Temujin gradually united the fractious Mongol tribes under his leadership. In 1206, he was declared Genghis Khan, meaning universal ruler. Once in power, he launched campaigns that swept across Asia. His armies conquered huge territories, including northern China, Central Asia, Persia, and parts of Eastern Europe. By the time of his death in 1227, the Mongol Empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea. The source of his power lay in his revolutionary approach to warfare and governance. He organized his armies into disciplined units based on merit rather than an aristocratic birth. His use of cavalry, speed, and mobility gave the Mongols overwhelming advantages against larger but slower foes. Siege warfare techniques, intelligence networks, and psychological strategies, like spreading terror to encourage surrender, were all part of his arsenal. Beyond the military prowess, though, Genghis Khan created a framework for governing his empire. He established laws, promoted trade along the Silk Road, and encouraged communications across cultures. Under his leadership, a system of relay stations allowed messages to travel quickly across thousands of miles, and his empire provided relative stability and safety that enabled commerce and cultural exchange, a period historians call the Pax Mongolica. His legacy was controversial. His campaigns caused immediate destruction and loss of life, with entire cities wiped out and populations massacred. Yet his empire facilitated connections between East and West that shaped our history. After his death, his descendants expanded the empire even further, eventually controlling nearly all of Asia and parts of Europe. The Mongol Empire influenced the development of Russia, China, and the Middle East, leaving imprints on political and cultural structures. He not only commanded armies that conquered a continent, but also created systems that altered the course of history. Number 13. Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was a Roman general, a statesman, and a dictator whose life and actions transformed the Roman Republic into the foundations of the Roman Empire. His military campaigns, political maneuvering, and personal authority reshaped one of history's most influential civilizations, making him one of the most powerful individuals in recorded history. Born in 100 BCE into a patrician family, Caesar quickly became involved in Roman politics. He rose through the ranks of public office, gaining popularity among the people while carefully building alliances with key figures. His partnership with Pompey the Great and Crassus, known as the First Triumvirate, gave him the political clout to secure a command in Gaul. It was in Gaul that Caesar built his reputation as a military genius. The commentaries on the Gallic War, which Caesar wrote himself, detailed his victories and promoted his image back in Rome. His conquests brought immense wealth, prestige, and loyal soldiers who were more devoted to Caesar than to the Senate. This growing power of Caesar alarmed Rome's traditional elites. When his alliance with Pompey collapsed, the Senate ordered him to give up his command. Instead, Caesar made the fateful decision to cross the Rubicon River with his army in 49 BCE, an act of defiance that triggered a civil war. The phrase "crossing the Rubicon" has since become synonymous with making an irreversible decision. Caesar emerged victorious after a series of battles, including his decisive defeat of Pompey at Pharsalus in 48 BCE. Returning to Rome, he declared himself dictator, first temporarily, then for 10 years, then for life. As dictator, he initiated sweeping reforms. He reorganized the calendar into the Julian system, which forms the basis of our modern calendar. He expanded the Senate, reformed the tax system, and enacted laws to help the poor. His concentration of power, however, threatened the traditional republican structure. In 44 BCE, a group of senators led by Brutus and Cassius assassinated Caesar on the Ides of March, hoping to restore the republic. Instead, his death plunged Rome into further civil wars. Ultimately, Caesar's adopted heir Octavian, later Augustus, defeated his rivals and established the Roman Empire, fulfilling what Caesar had set in motion. Julius Caesar's legacy is immense. His name became a title for rulers: Caesar in Rome, Kaiser in Germany, and Tsar in Russia. His life embodied the transition from republic to empire, and his military and political strategies influenced for centuries. His charisma and decisive action made him one of the most powerful individuals in human history. Number 12. Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon Bonaparte rose from some obscure beginnings on the island of Corsica to become Emperor of France and one of the most influential figures in history. His campaigns and administrative reforms reshaped Europe in ways that still endure. Born in 1769, Napoleon was educated at French military academies and quickly distinguished himself as a brilliant artillery officer. His rise began during the French Revolution, when the upheaval created opportunities for ambitious soldiers. By 1799, he had seized power in a coup d'etat, establishing himself as first consul of France. In 1804, he crowned himself emperor, a symbolic act that demonstrated his independence from traditional authority. On the battlefield, he revolutionized warfare. His victories at Austerlitz and Wagram cemented his reputation as one of history's greatest commanders. At the height of his power, he controlled most of continental Europe, placing relatives and allies on the thrones of conquered states. He reformed education, centralized administration, and established the Bank of France. Many of these reforms modernized the French state and outlasted his empire. Napoleon's ambition eventually led to overreach. His invasion of Russia in 1812 was a disaster, with an army decimated by cold, starvation, and attrition. The campaign marked the turning point of his fortunes. Defeated in 1814, he was exiled to Elba, but escaped the following year and regained power in a dramatic period known as the 100 Days. His final defeat came at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, after which he was exiled to the remote island of St. Helena, where he died in 1821. Napoleon's impact on history is undeniable. He redrew the map of Europe, spread revolutionary ideals of equality before the law, and inspired both admiration and resistance. Number 11. Qin Shi Huang. Qin Shi Huang, born Ying Zheng, was the first emperor of a unified China. His reign marked one of the most transformative periods in world history. His exercise of absolute power, combined with the scale of his reforms, makes him one of the most powerful people in history. He became the king of the state of Qin in 246 BCE at the age of 13, inheriting a kingdom already strong due to reforms instituted by earlier rulers. Through a series of relentless campaigns, he conquered rival states, defeating Chu, Zhao, and Han. By 221 BCE, he had unified China for the first time in history, declaring himself Qin Shi Huang, meaning first emperor of Qin. His authority was absolute. To consolidate the rule, he dismantled the feudal system, replacing it with centralized bureaucracy where officials were appointed and directed by the emperor. But perhaps his most famous project was the beginning of what would later become the Great Wall of China. He ordered the connection of regional walls built by earlier states into massive defensive systems against northern nomadic tribes. Though far from the wall that survives today, his efforts did lay the foundation for that structure. His rule extended into every corner of society, enforcing strict laws through the legalist philosophy. While this brought order, it also instilled fear. Critics were punished severely, and dissent was crushed. The infamous burning of books and burying of scholars reflected that determination to eliminate opposition and control information. His mausoleum, the tomb complex, guarded by the famous terracotta army of thousands of life-size soldiers, horses, and chariots, shows both the resources he commanded and his obsession with immortality. He sought elixirs of eternal life, ironically consuming mercury-based potions that likely hastened his death in 210 BCE. After his death, the Qin dynasty collapsed within a few years due to heavy taxation, forced labor, and harsh laws that bred resentment. Yet the structures he created didn't vanish. Subsequent dynasties adopted many of his reforms, and the idea of a unified Chinese empire under a central authority became the model for over 2 millennia. Number 10. Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union from the mid-1920s until his death in 1953, wielded immense power that reshaped not only his country, but also the global balance of the 20th century. As General Secretary of the Communist Party, and later as an unquestioned dictator, Stalin transformed the USSR into a superpower, but at the cost of enormous human suffering. Born in Georgia in 1878, he adopted the revolutionary name Stalin, meaning man of steel. After the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, he rose through the ranks of the Communist Party. By the late 1920s, he had outmaneuvered rivals like Leon Trotsky, consolidating power as the de facto leader of the Soviet Union. Stalin maintained his grip through terror. The Great Purge of the late 1930s saw hundreds of thousands executed and millions more sent to labor camps, the gulags. Political opponents, intellectuals, and military leaders, and ordinary citizens were accused of being enemies of the people. World War II then elevated Stalin to the status of one of the most powerful leaders on Earth. Initially signing a non-aggression pact with Nazi Germany in 1939, he was forced into an alliance with the Allies when Hitler invaded the USSR in 1941. The Soviet Union bore the brunt of the war on the Eastern Front, suffering staggering losses estimated at over 20 million lives. Yet the Red Army's eventual victories at the battles like Stalingrad and Kursk turned the tide of the war, and Soviet forces ultimately captured Berlin in 1945. His decisions directly shaped the post-war world order, from the founding of the United Nations to the division of Germany and the nuclear arms race. His death in 1953 ended one of the most powerful and brutal regimes of the 20th century. His legacy is deeply contested. He oversaw the defeat of Nazi Germany and the transformation of the USSR into a global power, but at the cost of tens of millions through famine, purges, and repression. Few individuals in history combined such absolute domestic control with such profound global impact. Number 9. Charlemagne. Charlemagne, also known as Charles the Great, was king of the Franks, king of the Lombards, and the first Holy Roman Emperor. His reign marked the revival of centralized authority in Western Europe after centuries of fragmentation following the fall of the Roman Empire. Through military conquest, political reform, and cultural patronage, he established a legacy that shaped Europe for centuries. Born around the year 742, Charlemagne inherited the Frankish kingdom jointly with his brother Carloman after the death of their father, Pepin the Short, in 768. Following Carloman's death in 771, Charlemagne became the sole ruler. Over the next 4 decades, he expanded his realm. He conquered the Lombards in Italy, subdued the Saxons after decades of war, pushed into Bavaria, and launched campaigns into Spain. By the end of his reign, his empire covered much of Western and Central Europe, an expanse not seen since the days of Rome. His crowning achievement, though, came in the year 800, when Pope Leo III crowned him Emperor of the Romans in Rome. This act symbolically revived the idea of a Western Roman Empire and established the precedent for what would become the Holy Roman Empire. Charlemagne's coronation represented the fusion of Roman, Christian, and Germanic traditions, laying the foundations of medieval European political culture. He established schools, encouraged copying of classical texts, and brought scholars to his court. Literacy and learning spread among the clergy and administrators, preserving much of Europe's intellectual heritage. He also standardized Christian worship, supporting the spread of Latin liturgy across his empire. His personal authority, though, was immense. He combined military power, political control, and religious legitimacy in a way few medieval rulers could even match. His empire provided relative stability in a turbulent era, and it helped shape the boundaries of modern European states. When Charlemagne died in 814, his empire was divided among his heirs, eventually fragmenting into smaller kingdoms. Yet his legacy endured in the idea of a united Christendom, a powerful monarch. And centuries later, European rulers continue to evoke his name and example. Number 8. Augustus. Augustus, born Gaius Octavius and later known as Octavian, was the founder of the Roman Empire and its first emperor. His rise to power and consolidation of authority marked one of the most consequential turning points in Western history. Born in 63 BCE, Octavian was the great-nephew and adopted heir of Julius Caesar. When Caesar was assassinated in 44 BCE, Octavian, just 18 years old, stepped into the chaos that followed. Despite his youth, he proved shrewd and determined. Aligning first with Mark Antony and Marcus Lepidus in the Second Triumvirate, he helped defeat Caesar's assassins Brutus and Cassius at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BCE. This alliance, though, soon fractured, and Octavian and Antony became rivals. Their conflict culminated in the naval battle of Actium in 31 BCE, where Octavian's fleet, commanded by Agrippa, decisively defeated Antony and Cleopatra of Egypt. With their defeat and subsequent suicides, Octavian became the undisputed masters of the Roman world. He commanded the legions, controlled the treasury, and had the final say in any governance. This carefully managed balance of republican appearance and autocratic reality allowed Augustus to rule without provoking the backlash that had doomed Caesar. His reign ushered in the Pax Romana, or Roman peace, a period of relative stability and prosperity that lasted 2 centuries. He reorganized the army, creating a professional standing force loyal to the emperor. He also established the Praetorian Guard, tasked with protecting him personally, but which later became a powerful political force. He expanded infrastructure with roads, aqueducts, and temples, famously boasting that he had found Rome a city of a brick and left it a city of marble. He instituted legal and administrative changes, standardized taxation, and he secured grain supplies to feed Rome's huge population. His patronage of the arts saw literature flourish, with poets like Virgil, Horace, and Ovid producing works that remain central to the Western canon. He ruled for over 40 years, dying in 14 CE, and by then, he had secured not only his legacy but also the foundations of the empire. Subsequent emperors owed their position to the structures he created, and the title Caesar Augustus became synonymous with imperial authority. Moving on to number 7, Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria reigned over the United Kingdom for more than 6 decades, from 1837 to 1901, a period known as the Victorian era. During her reign, the British Empire expanded to become the largest in history, covering nearly a quarter of the world's landmass and population. As monarch, Victoria became the symbolic figurehead of an age defined by expansion and cultural transformation. Victoria came to the throne at age 18 after the death of her uncle William IV. Although initially inexperienced, she quickly established herself as a strong-willed monarch. Her marriage to Prince Albert in 1840 became a central feature of her life and reign. Together, they had 9 children, whose marriages into European royal families earned Victoria the nickname the Grandmother of Europe. Her influence was significant. She advised prime ministers, maintained close relationships with political leaders, and used her position to shape public opinion. Her reign coincided with the administrations of figures like Benjamin Disraeli and William Gladstone, both of whom worked closely with her despite their differences. By the end of the 19th century, British rule extended across India, large parts of Africa, Canada, Australia, and numerous islands. Victoria was declared Empress of India in 1877, which symbolized the empire's global reach. Her personal influence was visible in her patronage of the cultural and moral values of the time. The Victorian era became synonymous with a strict code of conduct which emphasized duty, family, and morality. At the same time, critics note the era's stark inequalities and social upheaval. Victoria endured personal tragedies too, most notably the death of Prince Albert in 1861. She withdrew from public life for years, earning criticism for her seclusion. Yet she later re-emerged as a beloved figure, celebrated during jubilees that marked her 50th and 60th years on the throne. By the time of her death in 1901, she had become a global icon, respected by subjects across the empire. Number 6. Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States, held power at one of the most critical junctures in American history. His leadership during the Civil War preserved the Union, abolished slavery, and redefined the nation's values. Lincoln was born in 1809 in a log cabin in Kentucky, the son of a poor frontier family. His early life was marked by hard labor and limited formal education, yet he pursued knowledge relentlessly, teaching himself law and entering politics. By 1860, he had risen from these humble beginnings to win the presidency as the candidate of the new Republican Party. His election, however, was immediately divisive. Southern states, fearing his opposition to the expansion of slavery, began seceding from the Union even before his inauguration. The Civil War defined Lincoln's presidency. When Confederate forces attacked Fort Sumter in April of 1861, this conflict became unavoidable. Lincoln faced the challenge of leading a fractured nation through 4 years of brutal war. He wasn't a military man by training, but he grew into the role of commander-in-chief, learning from mistakes and eventually finding in Ulysses S. Grant the general who could deliver sustained victories. His power rested not only on his military leadership, but also on his ability to articulate the Union's cause. His speeches, including the Gettysburg Address in 1863, reframed the war as a struggle not just for national survival, but for the principle of human equality. The new birth of freedom, as he put it, connected the Union's survival to the abolition of slavery. The Emancipation Proclamation, issued in 1863, was a landmark use of presidential authority. While limited in scope, since it only applied to areas in rebellion, it transformed the war into a fight against slavery and allowed black men to join the Union Army. This decision shifted the morale and political stakes of the conflict and weakened the Confederacy. 2 years later, Lincoln pushed for and saw through the passage of the 13th Amendment, permanently abolishing slavery across the U.S. Lincoln also demonstrated power in his political skills. He managed factions within his own party, balanced competing interests, and worked to keep border states loyal to the Union. His ability to navigate political maneuvering and public opinion gave him leverage that went beyond formal authority. On April 14, 1865, just days after General Robert E. Lee's surrender at Appomattox effectively ended the Civil War, Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. His death made him a martyr, but his legacy was already secure. He had served the Union, ended slavery, and redefined the United States as a nation built on freedom and equality. Number 5. Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom during World War II, held power at a moment when the fate of Europe, and perhaps the world, hung in the balance. His leadership, his rhetoric, and his refusal to surrender to Nazi Germany made him one of the most powerful figures of the 20th century. Churchill was born in 1874 into a prominent aristocratic family, the son of Lord Randolph Churchill and American heiress Jennie Jerome. He pursued a military career, serving in conflicts from Sudan to South Africa, and later turned to politics. By the 1930s, though, Churchill's career was in decline, and his warnings about Nazi Germany went largely unheeded by colleagues who favored appeasement. When Germany invaded Poland in 1939, plunging Europe into war, Churchill returned to government as the First Lord of the Admiralty. After the disastrous early months of the war and the resignation of Neville Chamberlain, Churchill became the Prime Minister in May of 1940, just as German forces swept through Western Europe. Britain stood alone against Hitler, facing invasion and aerial bombardment. Churchill's power stemmed from his ability to rally the nation during its darkest hour. His speeches in the House of Commons and on the radio, including the famous declarations, "We shall fight on the beaches," and "Their finest hour," galvanized the British resolve. His unyielding stance, "I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat," embodied defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. Cultivating a relationship with President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, this partnership, later expanded to include Joseph Stalin, formed the Allied coalition that ultimately defeated Nazi Germany. Churchill's presence at major wartime conferences, including Tehran, Yalta, and Potsdam, gave him influence over the shaping of the post-war world. Churchill's leadership wasn't without controversy. He did support colonial rule and made decisions like handling of the Bengal famine in 1943 that remained criticized. His post-war years saw him voted out of office in 1945, though he returned as Prime Minister from 1951 to 55. In 1953, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature for his historical writings and oratory. Despite flaws and setbacks, though, Churchill's role in World War II is central to his legacy. Without his determination and ability to inspire people, Britain's resistance to Nazi Germany might have faltered. His leadership not only kept his nation fighting, but also bought time for the United States and Soviet Union to enter the war, which changed the balance of power. Number 4. Franklin D. Roosevelt. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the 32nd President of the United States, is remembered as one of the most powerful leaders in modern history. His 4-term presidency spanned 2 of the greatest crises the United States ever faced, the Great Depression and the Second World War. His ability to lead a divided nation and reshape government and project American power on the world stage makes his story a profound example of influence on history. Born in 1882 into a wealthy family in Hyde Park, New York, Roosevelt enjoyed privilege, but also faced some personal challenges. He was a distant cousin of Theodore Roosevelt, the energetic 26th president, and admired his cousin's activism in government. Educated at Harvard and Columbia Law School, Franklin Roosevelt entered politics as a Democrat, winning election to the New York State Senate in 1910. His career was shaped early by his service as Assistant Secretary of the Navy under President Woodrow Wilson during World War I. A devastating illness in 1921 changed his life permanently. At age 39, Roosevelt contracted polio, leaving him paralyzed from the waist down. Though he never regained the ability to walk unaided, he refused to let his disability define him. His determination to recover and remain active in politics became a central element of his character. He used leg braces, canes, and the support of aides to stand at public appearances, cultivating an image of strength. In 1932, as the unemployment soared and banks collapsed, Roosevelt ran for president, promising a new deal for the American people. His victory over Herbert Hoover marked the beginning of a transformative era in American government. His power came not only from policy, but from his communication. In his fireside chats on the radio, it brought reassurance directly into American homes. His confident tone and ability to explain complex problems in simple language reassured citizens in an era of uncertainty. For millions, he wasn't just a distant politician, but a voice of stability. As Commander-in-Chief, Roosevelt directed the largest mobilization in American history. Under his leadership, the U.S. built a military-industrial machine that supplied not only its own forces, but also those of its allies. The U.S. Navy dominated the Pacific, while American troops fought in North Africa, Italy, France, and Germany, and Roosevelt played a central role in Allied intelligence, working closely with Winston Churchill and Joseph Stalin. Domestically, though, the war effort brought some change. Factories had to be retooled for military production, women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers, and African Americans migrated north for war jobs, sowing the seeds of social transformation. Roosevelt managed these changes while maintaining a political support, winning re-election in 1940 and 1944, despite being the only president to serve more than 2 terms. His unprecedented 4-term tenure reflected the extraordinary trust placed in him by the American people. Roosevelt's health, however, was failing. He died in April of 1945, just weeks before the end of World War II in Europe. His death shocked the nation, but his legacy was already secure. He had led America through depression and war, expanded the role of government, and positioned the United States as a global superpower. Number 3. Muhammad. Muhammad ibn Abdullah, the Prophet of Islam, stands as one of the most powerful individuals, not only because of his leadership during his lifetime, but also because the religious, political, and cultural legacy he established has endured for more than 1,400 years. Muhammad was born around the year 570 CE in Mecca, a city in the Arabian Peninsula that was the center of trade. He was orphaned at a young age, grew up under the care of relatives, and worked as a merchant. His honesty and character earned him the title Al-Amin, meaning the trustworthy. At the age of 25, he married a wealthy merchant widow whose support proved crucial in his early years. At about the age of 40, he began receiving revelations that he believed came from Allah, or God, through the angel Gabriel. These revelations, later compiled into the Quran, emphasized monotheism, social justice, charity, and submission to God's will. His message challenged the polytheistic practices of Mecca and the social inequalities of Arabian society. In 622 CE, he and his followers migrated to Medina, an event known as the Hijra, which marks the beginning of the Islamic calendar. In Medina, Muhammad has established a new kind of community that combined religious, social, and political leadership under his authority. By 630 CE, Muhammad returned to Mecca with a large following, taking the city peacefully and rededicating the Kaaba to the worship of God. By the time of his death in 632 CE, Muhammad had unified much of the Arabian Peninsula under Islam. His teachings spread rapidly, carried by his followers through conquest, trade, and preaching. Within a century, Islamic civilization stretched from Spain to Central Asia, creating one of the most influential empires. Islam today is the second largest religion in the world with over 1.8 billion adherents. The Quran and the Hadith, the sayings of Muhammad, continue to guide spiritual, ethical, and legal practices across societies. Islamic art, science, philosophy, and law have left an indelible mark on world history. While his followers see him as the final prophet, historians recognize him as a transformative leader whose impact has been felt across centuries and continents. Number 2. George Washington. George Washington is remembered not only as the first president of the United States, but also one of the most powerful figures in human history because of the unique combination of leadership, restraint, and vision that allowed him to help shape a democratic republic. Unlike conquerors or monarchs whose power was measured in absolute rule, Washington's influence came from the way he wielded power sparingly, guided by principle, and in doing so, established precedents that would define a new nation. Born in Westmoreland County, Virginia, in 1732, Washington grew up on the frontier of the British Empire in North America. His family was modestly wealthy by colonial standards, owning land and slaves, though not part of the highest aristocracy. His formal education was limited, but he displayed ambition and discipline early, learning surveying and acquiring land of his own. As a young man, he entered military service during the French and Indian War, gaining first-hand experience of combat, logistics, and the complexities of colonial and imperial politics. His most significant role began with the outbreak of the American Revolution in 1775, when tensions with Britain escalated into open conflict. The Continental Congress appointed him Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. This was a daunting assignment. The colonies had little in the way of a professional army, were poorly supplied, and faced the might of the British Empire, whose military was the most powerful in the world at the time. Washington understood the odds, but approached the task with determination. His military leadership wasn't defined by constant battlefield victories. He lost more battles than he won, but by resilience, strategy, and the ability to maintain the army through years of hardship. His decision to avoid decisive annihilation by retreating when necessary, while keeping the Continental Army intact, was key to prolonging the struggle until circumstances turned in favor of the Americans. Iconic moments like the daring crossing of the Delaware River on Christmas night in 1776 and the subsequent victory at Trenton demonstrated his capacity to inspire hope when morale was at its lowest. Over the next several years, he held the fragile coalition of states and soldiers together, culminating in the victory at Yorktown in 1781, achieved with crucial French support. He was a unifying figure for the colonies, respected across regions and social classes. His personal character, marked by integrity, patience, and a refusal to grasp power, gave him moral authority. At the end of the war, when many expected him to seize greater control, Washington shocked the world by resigning his commission to Congress in 1783. This act of surrendering military authority to civilian leadership was virtually unprecedented at the time, and it reinforced the principle that the United States would not become another dictatorship born out of revolution. King George III of Britain is reported to have remarked that if Washington truly gave up power, quote, "he will be the greatest man in the world," end quote. Washington's reputation and presence lent crucial weight to the Constitutional Convention of 1787 in Philadelphia, where he was unanimously elected president of the gathering. Though he did not speak often, his steady leadership helped the delegates craft the U.S. Constitution, a document that created a stronger federal government while balancing power among the branches. Washington's support for the Constitution during the ratification debates was critical in persuading skeptics that this new system would not lead to tyranny. Number 1. Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus of Nazareth is regarded as one of the most influential figures in human history, not because he held political office, commanded armies, or built empires, but because his teachings, life, and legacy gave rise to Christianity. His impact cannot be measured solely by the events of his 30-some years on Earth, but by the movement that continued after his crucifixion, spreading across continents and altering human culture, law, art, and morality in profound ways. He was born in Bethlehem, traditionally dated around the reign of Herod the Great. The precise details of his birth are subjects of religious belief and scholarly debate, but historical consensus affirms that he grew up in Nazareth, a modest town in Galilee. His early life was that of a carpenter's son, and little is recorded in historical sources about his childhood and youth. And what is clear is that in adulthood, he emerged as a teacher, healer, and preacher, drawing followers with a message that emphasized humility and compassion. He preached the love of God and the love for one's neighbors as central commandments. He welcomed outcasts, the poor, women, tax collectors, and sinners, challenging social hierarchies and religious authorities. His parables, simple yet profound stories drawn from everyday life, conveyed moral and spiritual truths that were accessible to ordinary people. He healed the sick, gave hope to the marginalized, and spoke of forgiveness, peace, and a deeper righteousness that went beyond ritual observance. Crowds gathered to hear him speak, and his reputation spread across Galilee and Judea. But his growing influence drew the suspicion of local religious leaders and the Roman authorities, who feared unrest. He was accused of challenging established laws and presenting himself in ways that could be interpreted as a threat to both the religious establishment and the imperial rule. The climax of his life came in Jerusalem, where he was arrested during the Passover festival after a period of increasing tension. Betrayed by one of his followers, Judas Iscariot, Jesus was tried before the Jewish council and then handed over to the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. Though Pilate is said to have found no clear crime against him, the pressure of the crowds and the fear of disorder led to the order for crucifixion, a Roman method of execution reserved for rebels and criminals. Yet his death did not end his influence. His followers believed he rose from the dead 3 days later, appearing to them and commissioning them to spread his teachings. Whether one interprets the resurrection as an article of faith or as the galvanizing experience of his disciples, the fact remains that it transformed a small group of disheartened followers into bold proclaimers of a new message. From this moment, the movement that would become Christianity began to spread across the Roman world. The reach of Jesus' influence cannot be separated from the moral and ethical framework that he introduced. The emphasis of love, forgiveness, humility, and the inherent worth of individuals became cornerstones of a moral philosophy. Monastic traditions preserved learning during the so-called Dark Ages, cathedrals and churches became centers of art and architecture, and Christian thought shaped laws, inspired reform, and guided rulers for centuries. Even in modern times, concepts like human rights, equality, and charity bear the imprint of his message. Critically, the reach of Jesus' influence extends beyond Christianity itself. Islam, another of the world's major religions, regards Jesus as a prophet and honors his teachings, even as it interprets them differently. In Judaism, he remains a figure of historical and theological debate, and in secular thought, his ethical teachings have been studied, adapted, and admired by leaders, philosophers, and reformers, regardless of their belief. Figures like Mahatma Gandhi openly acknowledge their debt to his words on peace and nonviolence. The paradox of Jesus' power, though, is that it emerged from apparent weakness. Crucifixion was designed to erase him from memory. Instead, it amplified his message across centuries and continents. His story shows how power can endure beyond life itself, carried not by institutions or weapons, but by conviction and faith. This kind of power has proven even more enduring than many empires, outlasting Rome, Byzantium, and countless kingdoms that rose and fell while his name remained.